Newsmaker Sunday with Fox 10's John Hook.
Thanks for joining us on Newsmaker Sunday. We're going to take a little break from the political today, and I want you to stay tuned because we're going to learn a lot from this guy. 25 years with the U.S. Secret Service, from Lyndon Johnson all the way to Bill Clinton. Protecting the president, protecting the country, looking out for counterfeit stuff, money, protecting the Pope at one point. Don Tucker is our guest on Newsmaker Sunday. 25 years in the agency. For a kid who grew up in Chicago, played football at Iowa, college football, you did pretty darn well for yourself, didn't you? That was a great career.
You know, as I think back on my career, you know, I grew up in the a ghetto area of Chicago. My mom, either my mom or my dad, you know, had high school diplomas. So I wasn't in a household that they could help me with, let's say, my homework. But they gave me all the love and attention that I needed. So you balance one with the other.
Yeah, and you almost took a shot at professional football, but the service came to you and said, if you want a job right now, you got it, right? That was pretty much the long and short of it?
That's the long and short of it.
And 25 years later, there you are.
Yep.
I want to get to this because obviously the service has come under tremendous criticism here in the last couple of weeks, but even before that, there have been questions about what's going on. First of all, we've got a guy with a knife, jumps over the White House fence, waltzes through the front door of the White House, which is unlocked. This guy. He's an Iraqi war veteran. Then you've got another case where a security guard at the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention in Atlanta, a guy there, a security guard, had a gun and a criminal record and was in an elevator with the president, taking pictures with the president. Right. Can you believe this stuff?
John, I've thought about this over and over again, and no way can I even phantom the service allowing that type of lax of security. The elevator incident, you know, whenever we are...
That's the worst one, actually.
Yeah, whenever we are doing an advance, let's say the advance team, they screen everyone. If you have a record, you get the day off. You tell the employer, look, this guy has a record, you know, he can't be anywhere around. You know, if you don't have another place for him, give him the day off. How did this guy, you know, get through that type of background, be on an elevator with a gun, and the service or the advance team were not able to even recognize it?
Well, I want you to look at the guy, the jumper, who got over the White House fence, which is what? On Pennsylvania Avenue, you're looking at it right there. It's about 8 feet tall, right? 8 feet tall. He jumps over it. Now, we're going to see the video. I don't know, Don, if you've got a good vantage point of looking at it. Right there, you can kind of see it. It's cell phone video, but the guy climbs over and he makes a beeline for the bushes.
Right.
And you see agents moving around toward him.
Right.
What was going on?
Well, the first thing that still another mind-boggling situation, you know, they didn't let the dogs loose. Now, the dogs could have stopped this guy. You know,
and you know the story we got. Couldn't let the dogs out because we didn't want him to attack the agents.
But think about the job that they have to protect the life of the President of the United States. They don't know if this guy has explosives on him. They don't know if he has a gun. So do you say, well, I let the dogs loose, he may bite somebody else, right? But is that more important, that mentality, than the protection of the President of the United States? Not only this president, but any future president. The dogs should have been released. I know they've tried to explain why the dogs were not released, but in that situation, when you don't have a uniformed officer with the physical ability to run this guy down, the dogs could run him down.
How did he get to the, I mean, I've been outside of there many times. I've been inside because I interviewed President Obama back in 11. I don't see how you get to the fence and start climbing over it without everybody descending on you.
Well, in the old days, you could climb that fence because they didn't have enough security. Today, I'm amazed that I'm watching security, and if you look at when the guy gets over the fence, there are white shirts, and I mean white shirts, I mean the uniform division, walking back and forth on the outside. Now, wouldn't those uniform officers be more valuable if they were walking on the other side where a person could jump over?
Or if they're walking on the outside, they should never let him get to a point where he's starting to climb the fence.
Right.
You stop it right there.
So,
right?
you know, I think, you know, I know that they're doing an investigation. And I think that this investigation should determine, you know, the overall conditions of the uniform division. Because it's not the agent's responsibility of protecting that White House. It's the uniform division.
Right.
And any mistakes made, uniform division, if they don't have enough manpower, but if they don't have enough manpower, you have to protect the inside.
I want to take you through. I did an explainer on Fox 10 News on Monday night when we finally got a sense of what happened with this guy who got inside the White House. And I kind of drew it on the Storyteller, and we pulled it so you could see it now. It kind of explains how this guy jumped the White House fence, got in through an unlocked front door, right by a guard there, and ends up heading toward the East Room. So take a look at this, and then we'll talk to Don about what he sees. Well, we didn't get the whole story. There are new details tonight emerging about the armed man who jumped the White House fence earlier this month before being captured by the Secret Service. Today, we learned that Omar Gonzalez made it much further into the White House than previously known. This is scary stuff. After scaling the fence on the north side, this would be the north portico here. This is the part you see, on the TV news every night, the north portico. In fact, the reporters are over here, and they shoot back this way toward the north portico, that front part of the White House. After he scaled the fence on the north side of the building, he ran right up through this area and went right through the front door. Now, I want to show you on Storyteller because agents alerted the guard at the door, but inside the usher's office, that phone was turned off for some unknown reason. So let's set the stage here. He comes through the front door. He starts heading this way, heading down toward the East Room. This is the usher's office. Somebody was in there, but they had no idea all of this commotion was going on because, again, the phone wasn't working. So let's spin you around. Now, this is the scary part. He goes right down this entryway into the East Room, which is right here. Do you know what this is? That is a stairway that leads to the Obama residence. The residence is on the second floor of the White House. He was right basically at the entryway to go up there. Now, fortunately, the Obamas had left for Camp David with Sasha and Malia for the weekend, so they weren't there. So let's move you and reorient you now to the East Room. You've seen this so many times. The president gives speeches right here. He'll stand usually in this area right here. Well, this guy, if we'll orient you, he comes right through the hallway into the East Room right here. This right here is the Green Room. Now, somewhere, we don't know exactly where, right in front of the Green Room at one of these entrances, these guards dropped this guy. They finally got it together and put that guy on the ground and put him in cuffs, and they arrested him. Tomorrow, Secret Service Director Julia Pearson will appear before lawmakers to testify about this incident, as they're calling it, as well as several other security incidents at the White House in recent months. Some people think the Secret Service is losing its grip. They want answers. Okay, so we're back with Don Tucker, 25-year veteran of the U.S. Secret Service. Is this agency different than when you were there? What's happened?
Not so much. I think their protection responsibility has increased. I understand that a few years ago there was a big budget cut, and their budget was cut, a great deal. But to me, the primary function of the Secret Service is protection. Sometimes you have to step back from the counterfeiting, the check forgery, the credit card fraud, if your budget requires more given to the protection side.
I was going to ask you about that. Is it wise that the U.S. Secret Service protect our currency when protecting the president is probably job one, obviously?
Right.
Maybe they got too much going on. Has anybody thought about splitting that duty off to Treasury or something like that?
Well, in my opinion, I think one of the things that has impacted the Secret Service is when they were put into the Homeland Security part. I think the Secret Service, like the FBI, should have been separate.
Spread out too thin.
Yeah, and I think because they were put into this Homeland Security, they were spread too thin.
But the guys on the ground, I mean, I've been around them. They are unbelievably dedicated. So what, is this coming from the top? Is this a management problem or a rank and file problem?
I think that, it has to do with the culture. I think the people that they are hiring as agents, to me, not all of them, naturally, but they don't have this, seem to have the same type of dedication,
Is this a generational thing?
It may be, but complacency. That should never be a part of the overall organization. When I was trained in as a agent, one of the things that they had a little game that we played. You know, the game was, John, you're the protectee. 2 other agents was identified as bodyguards. The instructor said, at some point, there's going to be an assassination attempt. I'm not telling you when or where, but it's going to happen. What does that do? It makes you think.
Focus.
You know, focus that something's going to happen.
You know what? You came into the agency in 1975, so that would have been 13 years after this.
Mm-hmm.
This is a defining moment, I think, for the Secret Service.
Mm-hmm.
November 22nd, 1963.
Right.
This is the ultimate loss. This is when the agency, and I think Clint Hill did a masterful job that day. I don't know what else they could have done.
Right.
Do you know what else they could have done to save John Kennedy?
I think they did exactly what they were supposed to do at the time. I know with the Warren Commission report, there was some criticism, not only for the Secret Service, but the FBI. You know, some of the agents were accused of being out, you know, drinking the night before. You know, would that have been a factor? You know, and if you see what happened with the shots being fired, you know, there's not much the agents could have done in that situation with the president riding in an open limousine.
Mm-hmm.
But Clint Hill, as you mentioned, he did exactly what he was trained to do. And to me, I'm still amazed that he was able to run from that follow-up car all the way to the limousine in order to protect
Jackie Kennedy,
right,
who was really his primary
right,
responsibility.
right.
This is Clint Hill, the officer, the agent, who ran onto the back of President Kennedy's limousine and climbed up and in and sheltered them and rode to Parkland Hospital as the president lay mortally wounded in the back of the limousine. This changed everything, didn't it?
It did change.
You had to start sweeping buildings with any vantage point. Now you're in manhole covers, you're in the sewer, you're all over the place now, right?
Yeah, and if you remember when the Pope visited Phoenix, you know,
Yep.
that was one of the biggest concerns. And even the neighbors along Central Avenue were saying, you know, you guys are checking the manhole covers and the mailboxes, you know. And one person asked me, well, if I peep, because his residence faced Central, he said, can I look? If I keep my drapes closed, will I be shot? You know, it was comical at the time, but the concern was, I see so much security, you know, can I do something that anybody would be?
Well, and John Paul had been the target of assassination attempts.
Absolutely.
So that really changed it. And the president from that moment forward became much more inaccessible, right?
Yeah.
He just isn't out there as much.
Right, and there's no more open limousines,
Right.
you know.
And there might not have been one that day had the rain kept falling in Dallas.
Right, right.
It would have been closed.
Right, absolutely.
We're back with Don Tucker. 25 years with the U.S. Secret Service. We're going to be talking about the attempt on President Reagan's life in 1981. He was around for that too. How that changed the protocol and where the agency goes from here, and some of Don Tucker's remembrances of serving these men, the most powerful man in the world. Still ahead on Newsmaker Sunday. Don Tucker is our guest today on Newsmaker Sunday. 25 years with the U.S. Secret Service. This guy has pretty much seen it all. Let me hold up the book because you wrote this. This is called, I get the reflection off it, Immaculate Deception. A U.S. Secret Service agent cracks a Vatican counterfeiting and pedophile case. So an author, Secret Service, if somebody wants to get a hold of the book, where do they find it?
You can get it from Amazon, Barnes & Noble, iBook, you know.
Look up Don Tucker and you'll be able to find it.
Yes.
Okay. I want to go to tape number 5. This was I'm going to have to check my memory, but I believe it was March 30th, 1981. Does that sound right? Ronald Reagan.
Reagan, yes.
Hilton Hotel
Right.
in Washington, D.C.
Right.
Let's roll the tape. Again, the president in a position where he's exposed out in a crowd. And John Hinckley takes a shot at him.
Right.
And several.
Right.
And obviously severely wounds Delahanty, the Washington, D.C. Officer. He wounds James Brady, obviously.
Yeah.
Again, Don, I wonder, and I think the public wonders, if the president's out there in the public, if somebody is willing to trade their life for the president's, is the president safe?
I think if the proper security procedures are in place, you know, I think I can safely say that the president is safe. Now, I would have a caveat with that. You know, we've never had a situation where someone is going to strap bombs on their body.
Are you worried about that?
Oh, I'm concerned about it, yes. That's why the initial security, the advanced team, et cetera, has to make sure that those areas are covered, if the president is going to come anywhere near a crowded area. He has been in this situation in Washington, D.C. at the Hilton. He has been there, Reagan had been there numerous occasions, and nothing happened. That's why I mentioned complacency. Sometimes if you do the same thing over and over and over again and nothing happens, your watchfulness is lowered. Because
human nature.
That's human nature. You think that nothing's going to happen.
Right.
Then all of a sudden, boom, we got a big problem.
Question about that, and I asked you about this on the phone the other day, and I want you to say it here. The president, when this guy got over the fence last week and ran up and gets through the open door, which I can't figure out why the door to the White House is open. I mean, I don't leave my door open.
Right.
What in the world? All right. That said, the president had just flown away on Marine One with the First Lady and Sasha and Malia to Camp David.
Right.
When that helicopter takes off, all the agents know, you get something in your ear, right? You see it, it's gone. Does everybody let their guard down? In other words, if the president were actually in the White House, do you think this guy would have gotten that far?
I hope not. I've looked at that video, same video that you showed. There's a White House police officer that, if you look to the left of the screen, you can see him coming towards where this guy was going to the front door.
Right when he's going up the
and
steps.
You can see him, he's like this.
Yes.
Now, do you shoot or don't shoot?
Well, don't ask me, because I say you shoot. And the reason I say that is, if you've got snipers on the top of the White House, which they do, you know that, you see them up there.
Right.
What are they doing up there if they're not going to unload their weapon with a guy who's running toward the White House?
I think in that situation, and I can't speak for the officers, but I'm sure they have their weapons trained on the guy. They have only a certain amount of time being at that level of the White House, to see this guy before he gets underneath their line of sight.
Exactly.
Okay. Now, the guy who had his weapon pointing at him, he has to make a decision. Is he, as someone said, that we can't shoot situations like that because look at the criticism that we would get shooting a former Iraqi veteran who may have PSD. In my opinion, you can't have that mentality, because the person that you are worried about, is the President of the United States. What if this guy had weapons, which they didn't know?
Okay.
What if this guy had explosives?
Yes.
Which we didn't know? What if that guy who was going to shoot or tell him to stop, he didn't stop? He gets into the White House.
Yep.
What if the president had been in there? What if the First Lady had been there?
Well, that gets back to my question. Let's say the president was there.
Right.
Do you think the guy then fires?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure, but in my opinion, he should have. I would rather take the criticism for shooting a guy who is penetrating your security and may harm your protectee or harm someone inside the White House, and you shoot to stop him. I would take that type of criticism.
That's what you're paid to do.
In a heartbeat.
It's an ugly choice, but that's your job.
And what would happen if he did set off explosives? Or what if he did harm the president? Can you imagine the criticism the Secret Service would have had?
Right.
And they would play this video over and over again?
Right.
Wait a minute. You had the shot. You didn't take it.
Right.
So that's a decision that they have to make. But training and letting them know that sometimes you have to make a very, very tough decision.
Well, and it gets back to that question. Is all this security at the White House, is a lot of it for show? Or is it real? I mean, that to me was the obvious. If a guy is running and making a sprint toward the White House, I don't know what you got guys on the roof with a rifle for if they're not going to fire on that.
Not going to fire, yeah. And another thing that is mind-boggling, which is the whole situation. Not to have an automatic locking system on the doors.
I think they changed that this week.
Oh, you changed it after the fact.
Right.
But think about it. I didn't even realize that. Out of all
and
the
you
time
worked in the service.
And I worked in the service. I didn't realize that they could not automatically lock that front door. I have a cell phone. right? You know, I can be in Chicago. I can lock my door. I can close my windows. I can cut off my water.
This isn't that tough.
Right, it's not that tough.
We got about 30 seconds till we take a break. And when we come back, and I'm going to leave a little time because I want you to just, and I know you can't speak too out of school, but I want you to just talk briefly about each of the presidents you served and your impression of them. Can you do that?
I can't get too.
You can't get too specific?
No. You know, when I wrote my my first book, you know, I talked a lot about the Secret Service, but I talked more in terms of what happened to me as an agent.
Okay.
You know, rather than talking about our protectees. You know, I really believe that agents, and some agents have written books about what they've seen.
You're right. You think that's a violation?
I think that is a total violation.
Okay, well, let me put it this way then. We'll change course.
Okay.
How about this? When we come back, I want to find out if Don believes that President Obama is more of a target, perhaps, than prior presidents. He has certainly in recent years become a very polarizing figure in the country. We'll ask Don about that. Don Tucker, 25 years with the U.S. Secret Service, inside the Secret Service. Back in a minute on Newsmaker Sunday. 25 years inside the U.S. Secret Service. Don Tucker is our guest. Proud to have him on the program again. I think this is your second time on Newsmaker Sunday, so good to have you back.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Don, when we see you guys, I'm talking about us reporters, but the public sees it too. You're talking into your wrist. You've got a ear thing going. Who's talking to you and what are they saying? What's going on?
Well, it's probably just communication from one of the agents. It could be from the advance team.
Are you just scouring the crowd? Your eyes or your best friend?
You have to focus on the crowd. You know, one of the things about, you know, protection that, you know, I can talk about. I remember when Governor Wallace, you know, had the assassination attempt on him in Indiana.
Arthur Bremer.
In Indiana. High level of security because of his views. And I looked at it, and next thing I know, prior to that, I'm assigned to Wallace's protection detail. Now,
as an African American?
As an African American.
Interesting.
I was the only one out there who was African American. And I had people in his audience initially were looking at me like, what in the hell are you doing here? Right? You know.
It's 1968?
And then when they found out
right.
who I was and why I was there, I was one of the best buddies. You know? But it told me, if I can do that for someone like Governor Wallace,
who you did not agree with politically,
based on his views,
sure.
you know, then I would expect every agent to feel the same way.
It's your job.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's a nice segue into President Obama. Do you believe he is more at risk than prior presidents?
Yeah. I think last thing I've heard is that his threat level is 3 times what other presidents have had to deal with. I think that he is one of the only presidential candidates who received Secret Service protection even before he was nominated.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, and that was because of his threat level. You know, and I think he still has a high degree of threats. And I think with the political climate, etc., you're going to have some people who are not, you know, too sharp. You know, want to take advantage of the fact that they just don't like it.
Do you worry that there's going to be an attempt on President Obama before he leaves office?
I've been worried the first day he took office, you know. And I looked at the, you know, I tried to examine the reason why I thought that way. His day he was inaugurated, they were bringing this negative comments of, they're going to make him a one-term president, you know. They're not going to prove anything that he tries to do, you know. And I think that's had an effect on our whole political climate, you know. I was nominated as U.S. Marshal by President George H.W. Bush, the father. And,
we got about 10 seconds.
And, you know, I always felt that he was probably one of the presidents that I really, really respected. And
good man.
And I voted for him.
Hey, great to see you.
My pleasure.
Appreciate it. Great to see you and continued good health.
Okay.
This guy he's a specimen. I won't tell you how old he is, but he looks like he's about 45. And we'll just keep it there.
I'll take that.
We'll just say you're 45, Don. Don Tucker, our guest on Newsmaker Sunday. Thanks for joining us.
Subscribe to our YouTube channel and get all the best videos from Fox 10.